plants. You can easily find them everywhere. There are so many kinds of plants in this world. With that much of variation, become more interesting when there are flowering plants. The flower of plant is really nice to see. But is it making the plants beautiful is the only job for flower? Actually, flower is more than that. The flower is the reproductive structure of plants. It contains the reproductive organs. And most of the plants contain both the male and female reproductive organs. And for those kind of plants, they can do reproduction by passing the pollen from flower to flower. This process is called pollination. There are two main types of flower: insect pollination flowers and wind pollination flowers. Plants that is insect pollination flowers have bright colored flower, and they also have sweet sugary liquid that called nectars that attracts the insects to come along to collect that nectar, and they collect the pollen from plants. There are two common types of insect pollination flowers. They are flowers which have petals that open in a circle and flowers in which the petals from a tube. The following picture is show you few parts of an insect's pollinated flower which have petals that open in a circle. And the following picture show you parts of tubular insect pollinated flower. And how about wind pollination flower? Wind pollinated flowers don't stand out like insect pollinated flowers. They don't have colorful petals. It is because they don't need the color to attract insects. The most common plants with wind-pollinated flowers are the grass plants. Wind-pollinated flowers are smaller than insect-pollinated flowers. They may have green petals and do not produce nectar and seed. The nectar have long filament and allows the anthers to sway in the air, current to sway outside the flower in the air currents. The anthers make a large amount of pollen, and the stigma is feathery structure that hangs outside the flower and forms a large surface area for catching pollen in the air. The sex cells of living things are called gametes. In the animals, the male gamete is the sperm, and the female gamete is the egg ovum. In flowering plants, the male gametes are produced in the anthers, where each one is enclosed in a pollen grain. The female gamete, called the egg cell, is in the ovum. To help the pollination process, there are insects and weeds to make this process succeed. And one of them are bees. And right now, I would like to show you a video about bees and pollination and how bees are really important for plants. Let's check it out.
Hi, I'm Earth Ranger Giovanna, and I'm here at the fantastic hothouse to talk to you about bumblebees. Now you're probably wondering, what do bees and tomatoes have in common? Well, bumblebees actually play a very important role in the production of tomatoes. Here to tell me more is Dr. Purdy, who's been studying bees for over a decade.
Thanks, Giovanna. You're right. Bumblebees do have a very special role when it comes to producing tomatoes. Their role is to pollinate the flowers on the tomato plants. See, pollination happens when a brightly colored powder is moved from one part of the flower to another. The pollen is produced in the male part of the flower, which is called the anther, and it's moved to the female part of the flower, which is called the stigma. It takes one tiny grain of pollen to make each seed in the fruit or vegetable. For some plants, like grain and corn, the pollen is carried by the wind, but for many plants, like fruit and vegetables, bumblebees are responsible for the pollination.
That's very interesting. So can you tell me some of the other foods that bumblebees pollinate?
Yes, bumblebees are important for pollination of raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, almonds, watermelon, pumpkins, and many others, just to name a few. And they also help to pollinate other crops like clover when it's grown for seed, or canola grown for cooking oil.
So does that mean without pollination, we'd have trouble growing enough food?
That's right, Giovanna. We'd have grain and corn, but we depend on bumblebees for pollination of many fruits and vegetables. Remember that I said that one tiny grain of pollen is required for each seed in a fruit or vegetable. That means that if a flower doesn't get pollen or doesn't get enough pollen, there'd be less crop to harvest and the fruit would be smaller. We depend on pollination by bumblebees for much of our food supply. Wild plants and the wild animals that feed on them depend on bumblebees for pollination too. The problem is, some bees have been disappearing and all bees are under stress.
Do we know what's causing this?
Yes, recent research tells us that there are many factors. New bee diseases coming into our area, competition for food and nesting areas, loss and fragmentation of habitat. Pollution, pesticides, and climate change are also thought to be threats.
So by the sound of it, there are a lot of things that are making it harder for bees to survive, which is why we need to do more research to get to the bottom of this extremely important issue.
That's right, Giovanna. We do need to know a lot more about bumblebees.
This is why it's so important for Earth Rangers to join forces and support research so that we can better protect bumblebees. We're raising money to help scientists study habitat needs, pollination habits, and population sizes of wild bumblebees living in Western Canada, like the western bumblebee. This will help scientists understand bee diversity and pollination behavior. So what are you waiting for, Earth Rangers? Let's do our part to help bring back the wild.